Hi, everyone. I'm happy to see you here today for the May edition of Essential Vegan Desserts live event at Rouxbe. I'm Fran Costigan, the director of vegan pastry at Rouxbe. I've been with this company now, I think, for many, many years. I have to figure it out on my fingers, and I just love being with Rouxbe. I had a wonderful, exciting time co-creating the Essential Vegan Desserts course many years ago, and we've updated it some. It's a very unique course because we are teaching, my intention was fulfilled, and we are teaching foundational technique for creating vegan desserts that not only work, but are really terrific, fabulous, delicious. You know, we don't want any, that's good for what it is. We don't want to overcomplicate things. And so that really leads into the topic today, which is recipe testing or recipe development. Of course, you're welcome to send in questions that are off topic, and I'll answer them if I'm able to. I want to point out that I added or Patrick, our producer at Rouxbe, added a document that I created to the event that you can download and print and keep. But it is really what I use. I used a document very much like this when I was testing recipes for my cookbooks, and I would send the recipes out to people who were testing those recipes. But I also use them when I'm creating a new recipe for myself, because paying attention to everything really matters. You know, you might hit on something that's fabulous, but you have to go ahead and recreate it. And, you know, speaking of that, I tend to be a person that gets an idea. I get an idea and I want to just go. I want to go and start pulling things out and see what I can do with that idea. But over time, I have learned that recipe testing time should be recipe testing time, as opposed to just being put into some time in your day or your evening. You want to treat it as as a task that you're going to do. Now, I keep a notebook. You can see these are actually notes for the recipe that I was testing yesterday. And then I print it up, and I don't know if you can see, but there's different colors. This is the original recipe. And then in red, I add the changes that I've done, and then continue to add notes. And I'm very particular about what I add, because I'll tell you the truth, there are times that I've made something that I really like and I couldn't go back and, you know, follow the backward steps. I just didn't have the measurements, or I wasn't quite sure. Did I do this? Did I do that? So save yourself that trouble. Here I have batter 1, 410.5 grams, 14.46 ounces. Batter 2, 429 grams, 14.55 ounces. And that's really handy too when you're portioning things. You want to pay attention to everything. You really get to use all of your senses, not only measuring carefully, and that is very key, but also how much did the batter weigh? What did it look like? Was it thin? Did it look like runny peanut butter or tahina? Those are all things that will help you recreate your recipe, assuming that you feel that it's worth recreating or publishing it. And you want to make sure that people will be able to have a successful result, assuming that they followed your recipe. So I'm going to get into more of what I have written down that I want to tell you. But first, I just want to remind everybody that On the right side of your screen, there is a place to ask a question, and you can put that question right in there and I'll get to it. I want to welcome everyone. Now I jumped right in, but now I want to welcome everyone for being here, guests, Rouxbe students, graduates, my Essential Vegan Dessert students, particular welcome to the newer students. Rouxbe has changed the enrollment process so that you can enroll for any of our courses now at any time, not just every 3 months or so. So anyone who's interested in Essential Vegan Desserts, you can go to the website, and I would love to work with you. Remember, if you are in Essential Vegan Desserts and you're doing social media, hashtag Essential Vegan Desserts at Rouxbe Plants, so that we can find you. And I love to see what everyone is doing. We actually stay in touch. There is also a private Facebook group for Essential Vegan Dessert students. So if you haven't, if there's anyone here who hasn't yet joined that group, it's a great place to ask a question about a particular, maybe you're looking for a new mixer, or you have a question about something I'm thinking about doing this. Has anyone else gone with this particular item? And then if you have a question of a technical nature in the course, write to support at rouxbe.com, and someone from the team will get back to you. So that's that. And I want to get to what I wrote. You know, when I was thinking about recipe testing and recipe development, because I've been doing this for, oh my goodness, 30, 35 years, but I wanted to really hone in on what it is. And really what it is a process of repeatedly making a recipe to perfect it, and then ensure that it is foolproof for yourself to recreate or for readers, depending on what the case may be. Your goal is clearly to make something that is delicious, but also very consistent. And remember that when I talk about taste, this tastes good, people say, oh, that tastes really good. Well, taste is subjective, and we all taste things differently. When you're doing a recipe, you need to be objective about it. Now, I don't happen to like spicy foods. I like a little bit of warmth, so my recipes are skewed in a different way. And I was also thinking about the Kenny Rogers song, and I think that I don't know the name of the song. I think it was about a gambler or card player, it sounds like to me, but it goes, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away. And that really does apply to recipe tasting. We don't like waste. And I have done live events about what to do with some items that maybe didn't turn out the way you wanted them to. What can we do with that? Or what can we do with extra fruit or fruit pulp? When sometimes you get to a point with recipe testing where it's just awful. The result is just awful. And that is a point that you have to say to yourself, and it's your awful. Well, do I want to throw more money at it, more ingredients, and keep going? Or is this something that I'm going to write in my notebook? Did not work, do not try, goodbye, or however you want to say that. Now, how do you start with recipe testing? You start with an idea. It could be an original idea. For me, oftentimes it's, what do I really like that I haven't been able to recreate as a vegan version? Or what do I miss? You know, in the case of chocolate pudding, which is a relatively simple to make recipe using pantry staples, but there are what, there are ways you can ruin it. I wanted to make chocolate pudding, and I I tested it a few different times, and I have a chocolate pudding that I really like. Then you might think, well, has it been done before? And if you are food people, you know that there are so many versions of a particular item. There are so many vegan chocolate cakes. There are so many vegan chocolate ice creams, for example, or apple cobblers. Well, what I do is I say, oh, I think I want to make a new rhubarb sauce. Has it been done before? A quick Google search is going to tell you that. I look to see the number of that idea, but I don't look at the actual recipes because I want to create it myself. But I do want to see the action on that dessert. Or you can start with a recipe that is already successful, either your own or something you learned in the course or have been given access to. And today I'm going to show you 3 versions of a cookie that I made that I have made before. It's a recipe for a tahina cookie that really tastes like a shortbread cookie. It's got that short, crumbly texture. It's a recipe belonging to cookbook author Joan Nathan. I think she has written 12 cookbooks. Her newest book is a memoir that is just a memoir with recipes that's just out now. And I thought, I have that recipe on my website, and I put a link here, or you can go to my website, francostigan.com. It's been redone. I'm really proud of it. I think it looks great. And look at the original recipe. And then I also added in the Q&A, there's a link to the particular recipe from Joan Nathan's book that was republished in Eater. And before I shared the recipe, I wanted to make sure that it was legal to do so. And this recipe has been shared a lot and with permission. And this is something I want to talk about afterwards because or further down this live, because it's very important when you're giving credit, when you're taking credit and giving credit. So I want to talk about that cookie. It was very interesting to me. Well, if you're starting with a successful recipe, and that means you know that it works, because you made it and you liked it, and you didn't have any problems with it, or it was something that you learned or have been given access to and it works. Not all recipes are written as clearly as they should be, so you might have to do a little sleuthing. What comes to mind right away is cocoa powder. Recipe should tell you, is it alkalized or Dutch processed? Is it natural or non-alkalized, for example? But maybe you have an idea. I'm going to take this recipe and I want to make some changes. You want to reduce the amount of sweetener. I hear that a lot. And oftentimes the amount of sweetener can be reduced a little at a time. The kind of plant milk, the kind of flour. And I'm here to repeat, those of you who've been coming to my lives or have seen me at other events or read some of my blog posts know that I say every change makes a difference. And there's no getting around that. The type of granulated sweetener. Now, we're talking about vegan ingredients. Well, is it vegan cane sugar? Is it lightly ground or finely ground? Is it coconut sugar? Is it whole cane sugar? They are all granulated or dry sweeteners, and they are not necessarily a one-for-one swap. They might be, they might not be. The type of liquid sweetener you use, those are much more often not interchangeable. Maple syrup, rice syrup, date, molasses, agave have different properties, not only different flavors, and swapping them one for one is going to be a problem. And certainly when you're swapping a granulated sweetener for a liquid sweetener, that's a whole other ballgame. So get yourself a notebook and a pen, or talk into a recording device, but write everything down. I mean, even the kind of agar you use can make a difference. This is super agar, and I find that it's very strong. I think Eden brand powdered agar is very strong, and these are the flakes. They are not interchangeable at all. We talk about the proportions in the course. So I write everything down in a notebook. I keep it right next to me when I'm testing. And I also take photos of the different steps because I think that can be useful. I not only write the ingredient that I used and the brand that I used, and I have been using a scale like this more. Some of you have seen this at the live events because it switches between ounces, gram weight, and milliliters, and I want to write that all down. And I will write 1 cup AP flour, X grams, and so on. Now, there are a lot of conversion charts available. Some are better than others, but you're not going to get the exact amount. So you want to do your own weighing and keep your own list. I mean, I use measuring cups and measuring spoons, for example. And then when you go and weigh them, you're going to find some differences. So here you are, you want to create a recipe, you want to do it efficiently, you want to hope for a good result the first time. It might be, but the best thing to do is start with a smaller batch. So I scale the recipe down by half, sometimes by a quarter. You have to maintain the integrity of the recipe. So if I'm testing a cake and I scale this recipe down by a quarter, I'm going to bake more like a cupcake, but that's going to give me a lot of information, not necessarily about baking time, some, but about the texture, the mouthfeel, the flavor, of course. And that's what you can do. Always, if you're doing a baked item, make sure that your oven is preheated well in advance. Get to know your oven. I just recalibrated mine yesterday based on the cookie tests. I found that I could do that myself. And always do your mise en place. So here I have a little mise en place if I were making the vanilla cashew cream that's in the course, and I want to use, instead of the cane sugar, I want to use some dates. I want to make it taste lemony. Here you go. I would do that. And people don't talk about this enough when they're talking about recipe testing, but be prepared to wash and dry a lot of dishes because there is part of it. And frankly, I can't start unless my kitchen is really clean and really organized. So that's something that I think helps get into a mindset. So again, remember that the way people want to taste food, want food to taste, is subjective based on personal preferences, but a recipe tester needs to test a recipe objectively. You have to assess the flavor, the texture, the mouthfeel. And then let's say, you did your test one and it worked pretty well, and you set, saying you baked something, you set the oven for a range of temperatures. I have Alexa that I use as a timer. I have a timer on my stove, I have a timer on my watch, but I also write the time down that I put the item in the oven, because I have had situations where the tech went down and I didn't know how long something baked. So you want to make sure that you allow time for cooling and so on. And if you liked what you make, well, what about storing it? What I did with these cookies, and I think it's time to show you the cookies was I did 3 separate tests, and the third one was, to me, successful. I liked it. I would repeat it. I did another full batch, but I took 2 cookies and I put them in the freezer. I wanted to know if these cookies could be frozen. I left 2 cookies out on a plate, loosely covered, and I put a couple of cookies in Ziploc bags to see how that would go. And I was happy to find out that they freeze and defrost beautifully, and they they actually tasted better to me on day 2. And when I looked at the original recipe by Joan Nathan, she said they're good when they come out of the oven when they're cooled, but they taste better the second day. So I discovered that for myself. Now, what happens when you make something and it's just okay? What do? So you have the opportunity to continue, but you really need to change one item at a time, pretty much. And so, it really is a process. It really is a process. If it's awful, well, how awful is it in your mind? If it is inedible, and I have had some things that I've had to really toss out, and that hurts my heart because I don't like waste. I've had a few situations like that. Then that's the way it is. But let's say sometimes if you have a biscuit or a quick bread that just isn't right, the flavor's okay, or it needs brightening up. You know what really brightens things up is citrus zest that really, or a little bit of citrus juice, lemon juice or lime juice, just really elevates flavors, even in baked goods. So does vanilla extract. So does a little bit of almond extract. So those things will help. But if the bake wasn't the way that you wanted it, or a way that you would serve it or put it out into the world, maybe it can be toasted. I've had situations where biscuits or quick breads were better. Even cake was better after they were toasted. Or if your cake is just way too moist, I mean, we don't want dry cakes, but sometimes they don't bake right, or they bake right and the middle isn't quite right, then you can crumble the cake and make crumbs, and toast them in the oven. I have 3-4 bags of that in my freezer, including a biscotti. I was looking to change one of my 2 biscotti recipes, and lo and behold, I did not like the change, and I had a biscotti that I didn't want to eat or serve. So I crumbed it, and I have really nice anise flavored crumb for a parfait, and so on. So that, that works. Now, let me show you these different cookies. This one says number 4, and it's got a star on it. I'm going to put gloves on. So I wear gloves when I'm working, and I wear an apron or a chef coat when I'm working. And I really pay attention to sanitation. So labels, pens, parchment paper. I save parchment that I've baked on to use on my counter to put some dirty things down on. I'm going to put my gloves on. I also wanted to show you this. So I used tahini to make these cookies. They're tahina cookies. And I prefer a brand called Soom. It's SOOM. The Soom sisters are in Philadelphia. It's a runny tahini and very good. But like any nut or seed butter, when you open it, there's usually some oil on the top. People say store the jar upside down, and that will help put the nut or seed butter together. And it does to some extent. But I do this with all of my purchased nut and seed butters. I use an immersion blender once, and then it just doesn't have to be stirred again. So I'm going to put my gloves on so I can show you these cookies. I'm going to start with the one that says number 1. Now, I didn't like these at all, but not to the extent where I would throw them out. Not at all. So let me just see. Let me find myself. So I have windows open. All right, so this cookie, it looks okay, right? But the bottom is dark. The bottom is dark. And this should be, if you've ever had a shortbread cookie, you know that it just melts in your mouth. So I thought, well, that's really odd because I baked these cookies for a minimum amount of time. So I thought of two things. One, that my oven, even though the two thermometers said 350, that maybe the oven needed to be recalibrated. And I also thought, I'm going to bake these at 340 and see what happens. Then I have, that's number one. Number two, which were better. You can see the bottoms are less brown and they tasted good and they baked in 14 minutes and they were even and nice, but I still didn't think they were tender enough, the way a shortbread cookie should be. So I went backwards and I thought, I'm replacing in the original, oh, well, before I tell you what I replaced, let me show you the winning cookie. And most of them are in my freezer. So this is the one that I like the most. You can see that it's pale. The bottom is very lightly browned. They hold together. They taste delicious. You think I tasted a lot of pieces of cookies yesterday? Yes, I did. And you know what I had for dinner? I had a massaged kale salad with some beans and some cabbage, because that's what I have to do after I'm tasting a lot, more than I would. So the original recipe, which you can see, or I will tell you what it says 8 tablespoons, 1 stick, 113 grams of unsalted butter. Now, in the course, there is a unit on replacing fats, dairy fat. And so I say that 75 to 80%, you should, when you're converting from butter to vegan butter or oil, use 75 to 80%. Don't use the full amount. So the first test, I used 85 grams of Violife salted butter, because that's what I had. So some of you can probably guess that what I did was I left the salt out of the recipe. And I tasted this dough and it was fine. A teeny tiny taste, because we no longer say that tasting raw dough is okay, doesn't have eggs, but you can have salmonella can be present in flour. So, okay, the recipe on my website, I believe, was using oil. Not everyone has vegan butter, so the oil option is a good one, and Joan Nathan gives you that option here, but I would cut that back. It's the next item was 1/2 cup, 100 grams of sugar. I was using vegan cane sugar. Vegan cane sugar, the crystal is always larger. I lightly grind it in my food processor, and it's labeled as such. Well, the label's on this one, so this is the one. It says lightly ground, and that's what I used. And then baking powder, I use aluminum free. I wrote that down. Tahina, and I wrote Soam is runny. And then blanched and peeled almonds, which I blanched my own almonds. So Patrick, this would be a great time to show the picture of my mise en place when I started this process, if you would. All right. So that is the photo that I did, and I used that photo as a way to go back and remember what I did. Blanching almonds is really quick, 30 seconds in water, and then into some cold water, and you're done with that. So that was that. And it was fun to make. So here I didn't have anything that was awful, but I didn't get a result that I loved. And there's one more test I want to show you that I did this week that surprised me. Now, this won't be for everyone because not everyone likes the taste of matcha, but I do. And this is a matcha whipped cream. It's a very pale green. Why did I do matcha whipped cream? Well, because I had some BioLife vegan whipping cream that needed to be used up. I had some new vegan white chocolate from Valrhona, which is really a beautiful white chocolate. It has nuts in it, so it won't be for everyone. I find white chocolate to be so sweet. I'm not a giant fan. And after I did the first test where I combined cream with a little bit of melted white chocolate. In other words, I made a very light ganache, white chocolate ganache. I thought, ooh, it's too sweet for me. What can I do that I'll like? And then the next test, I infused some matcha powder into cream, let it get cold, added a bit of the matcha in, and I really loved it. And my son came to visit and he really loved it too. So that's, that was an idea of something where you say, well, that's too sweet. What can I do? Now, I have been talking for a really long time, so I want to start answering your questions. Hi, Shar. It's Chef Shar, my Rouxbe colleague and dear friend in Philadelphia. Hi, Shar. And Shar has asked a very interesting question. She said, what are your thoughts on using tahini as the fat source for making vegan biscuits? Should the tahini be chilled? I thought that was a really interesting question. And in the Q&A, I put a link to Zoom Tahini has an actual swap sheet for how you can use tahini in place of fat or even eggs. What I would say, Shar, is you're definitely going to have a different flavor. Tahini has a very definite flavor. So you have to consider that. In terms of it being chilled, I think any fat is best used cold, and some tahinis are runnier than others. I would definitely, in this case, cut the recipe by a quarter and go for it. And Shar, please let me know how that worked. I would love to know about that. Alessandra, hello. Alessandra asks, is it necessary to have formal academic training to become a recipe developer, or can someone who is very experienced but without formal training also be a full-scale developer? That's a really interesting question, Alessandra. It depends on different companies have different rules. There are some test kitchens that require a culinary degree. Some require an RD degree, as a matter of fact. But if you are experienced, you can start pitching yourself, get to various companies. People are always looking for recipe developers. So good luck with that. Maulana is asking, can I explain how I make my own recipes? What are the aspects we have to focus on? Well, I think I get an idea for something that I miss eating or saw in a restaurant or in a shop, and I want to recreate it. And so the aspects I have to focus on are, will this recipe be able to be made with ingredients that aren't exotic? Will the ingredients be readily available for people? Can this, depending on who I'm doing it for, if I'm working as a consultant, last year I was creating recipes for a whole food, plant-based, no oil company. And there was a very specific list of ingredients I could use, couldn't use. And if I'm doing something for a restaurant, then I might be using professional equipment, but I tend to test all of my recipes in with conventional equipment so that they can be replicated easily. So Maulana, take a look at the recipe testing doc that's part of this event, and it's going to really show you what are the aspects you have to focus on. Hi, Lucy. It's Lucy from San Luis Potosi. I may have said that wrong, Mexico. And she has an interesting question here. I love all these questions. She says, I'm sure you have explained before the reasons you prefer maple syrup over agave. Can you explain again? Okay. Maple syrup is easier to work with in baked goods than agave. When you're baking with maple syrup, assuming you have a good recipe or have learned about making desserts with maple syrup in Essential Vegan Desserts, it works very well. It works like an inverted sugar. And so it's easy to use. The flavor is good. Agave syrup, agave has gotten, first agave, years ago when I was still living in New York and teaching at the Natural Gourmet, agave became like the holy grail of sweeteners. It's low glycemic. It's really healthful. And then not so much. I mean, there is no holy grail. Sweeteners are sweeteners. But baking with agave means a lot of changes. You have to reduce the amount of sweetener. You have to reduce the temperature in the oven at least. And so that's why I do have a few recipes where I use agave. I appreciate how sweet it is. I do a vegan honey where I combine 3 sweeteners and one of them is agave. So, you know, just make sure, everyone here, make sure that if you're using agave, you use a pure one because some of them are cut with corn syrup from what I have heard. Hi, Molly. Molly says, love your Q&A sessions. Oh, I'm glad you asked this question, Molly. Molly says, I have noticed a lot of whole food plant-based recipes call for vegan butter. I typically do not buy any due to trying to avoid processed fat. Well, Molly, I really wonder where you are seeing whole food plant-based recipes calling for vegan butter, because most whole food plant-based and no oil recipes don't use vegan butter at all. They use no oil or very little. And vegan butter is, you know, a combination of vegan fats, of vegan oils. So it's not hydrogenated, it's a process. So no, I don't know any whole food plant-based recipes that call for vegan butter. If you are looking for a way to eliminate fat from your recipes altogether, we have a unit in the course on replacing fat with fruit purees, nut butters. Sometimes you don't have to use anything, just a bit more moisture. Some of the sweeteners, the whole food plant-based sweeteners like maple syrup, are humectant, and so they add moisture. So there you have that. And anybody here who didn't quite get what an answer, you can always write to me at fran@rouxbe.com, and I will be happy to answer your question more fully. Janet is saying, after making a recipe, if it needs improvement, can it be fixed so that it isn't wasted? What is the procedure? Well, Janet, if it needs improvement, but there's hope. In other words, the flavor's a little flat, or it's a little too sweet, or it's not sweet enough. The baking time needs to be adjusted. It was a little too dry. It was a little too moist. Then the fix is to make it again, but cut the recipe in half or by a quarter and try it again. Paying attention to what part wasn't great and how you think you can fix it. If I'm fixing a flavor, a cream, for example, you can't do this with a cake batter or a cookie batter, but you can do it with lots of things. I will take a portion into a small bowl and add maybe some lemon zest, maybe some vanilla extract, maybe some spice. See how that works. And then you get an idea based on that small amount of how you would add it to the larger amount or not. And, you know, again, you can make crumbs from a cake that wasn't just right, or if your cream was too runny, serve it as a sauce. I hope that works for you. Hi, Rosie. Rosie is asking about fresh herbs, the order of washing, how to dry and chop. Are there some herbs that should be torn instead of chops? And do I maintain an herb garden? Well, Rosie, in the summertime, and now it's after Mother's Day, and I'm in Philadelphia, it is time for my herb garden. My herbs did not make it through the winter. It's my greatest joy to go out to my small terrace and pick rosemary, thyme, basil. My basil did really well this year. My thyme did. I've given up on cilantro. It doesn't seem to like heat or my terrace or my, I don't know, my view, because I don't do that. I do have very sunny terrace windows, so I keep some rosemary plants there. And there's nothing like it. It just gives me such a thrill. But I wouldn't say I have an indoor herb garden in my apartment. What I do is, if I'm coming home from the farmer's market or the grocery store and I have bought a bunch of fresh herbs and I want to preserve them as long as I can, if any have been packaged in plastic, I take that plastic right out. I look for any bruised leaves and get rid of that right away. Get rid of that, because the same thing with the berry, you want to get rid of any spoiled bits. And then I wash the herbs separate, one from another, very gently under a spray of water, or more often in a salad spinner. And then I want to show you. So I have loads of these towels. Some are for drying my dishes, the red ones, and the blue ones are for storing herbs and other vegetable salad greens. So I pat them dry, and then I keep them in. If the towel is very wet, I'll use another one. I put this inside another bag in my refrigerator. Herbs like parsley and cilantro and some other herbs like that, I keep them the way I keep flowers. I put them, the stems, into a jar of water, and if I'm going to be using them quickly, I keep them out on my counter. It's never really hot in my home. Or I'll put them in the refrigerator sometime with I call it a shower cap, but a plastic bag over them. And then that's what I do with the herbs. In terms of chopping or tearing them, sometimes I tear basil, but you want to strip them off the stems before you chop. So I have this. I tend to do it myself instead of using this. And then make a little ball, let's say with the parsley or with basil or mint. You can roll the leaves up and chiffonade them. And that's what I do. You don't want to press really hard, and you want to make sure that your knife is really sharp so that the leaves don't get bruised. Rosie has another question about chia pudding. She's tried several recipes, but none except the chocolate one. I'd like a good fruit one, fruit for berries. I don't really have a recipe for chia pudding, so I'm going to say this here. You know, I talked earlier about subjectiveness. I don't care for chia pudding. It's just not my favorite texture. I think it's a textural thing for me. I've blended the chia and then I like it. So I don't have an exact recipe for you, but I would take chia. The plant milk that you use is going to make a difference in the kind of plant milk you like. Let it soak really well. Decide if you want to add sweetener. You might want some sweetener. And then I would just mash up some of the berries in the chia pudding, add that in. That's going to give you some texture, and nuts or seeds. You want to think in terms of texture always. That should help. Let me know how it goes. Hi, Lenny. Lenny sounds like me. I like little spiciness in my food, but I find when recipes ask for hot peppers or chipotle, the amount is overwhelmingly hot for me. How much should I start with to make it palatable? Well, spices vary from brand to brand or how long you've had them. I did a live event on spices, and people were teasing me because they said, I said, sniff your spices. In other words, you want to make sure that they're vibrant. If you don't smell anything, you're not going to have anything. So what I said earlier, I would take a small amount of what you're making into a bowl like this and start with, if your recipe says 1 teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of chipotle, for example, start with 1/4 and see how it is. You can always add, but you can't take away. Now, I don't like spiciness, but I actually love the flavor of ancho chili powder because it's a little teeny bit spicy. There's a little bit of heat, but it's got that smoky flavor. And I've been adding it to my chocolate cake to live for. And in that situation, I find, or to the ganache, that I have to add a lot more than I would have thought because chocolate has a very definite flavor. And especially if I'm using a dark chocolate, I'll add more, but I always add a little bit at a time. So I hear you on that. I always want to like spicier foods. Victoria's asking how she can keep her farro from becoming gummy when she cooks it. Victoria, I cook my grains. I don't know if you're cooking your grain in an amount of water and then waiting for the water to just evaporate completely. I tend to cook my grains, quinoa, for example, and rice in the way that I cook pasta. So I have a big pot of water at a boil, and I cook the grain until it's done, and then drain it right away and put it into a large dish, and then just kind of fan it, and it shouldn't be gummy when you do that. It's the starch that's making it gummy. So you might want to try cooking it for a shorter period of time or cooking it in more water. Hi, Catherine. Catherine says, I'm a huge fan of yours. Well, thank you. Bought your very first cookbook, and during several moves, I lost it. Oh, I'm sorry. Catherine, send an email to me at fran@rouxbe.com, and we'll see if I can get a signed copy to you. And Carol H says, was looking at your recipe for buttercream, which looks fabulous. How to store the unused portion. Buttercream isn't something that I use a lot, but it definitely can be stored. That recipe will hold in the refrigerator for weeks and weeks and weeks, and even can be frozen. You're just going to have to defrost it and re-whip it. So there's no problem with that. Catherine wants to know what sweetener should be avoided if I have cancer. I know processed white sugar, but I use maple syrup, agave dates. I'm not medical person, so I certainly don't want to give advice there. I will say that there are a lot of, you want to look at the studies or look at the doctors that we trust, like Dr. Greger, Dr. Esselstyn. Don't just willy-nilly over things. Maple syrup is a good sweetener. I would use that over agave. Dates, certainly date sugar, coconut sugar. I don't use xylitol. I don't use any of the non-sugar sweeteners. And if you want to know why, you can find a live event I did on that. Kathy C., I try to minimize the use of oils and fats as much as possible and prefer to use only EVOO. This is a very interesting question. In the place of solid fats such as peanut, use solidified EVOO, that's extra virgin olive oil, in the place of solid fats such as peanut butters and coconut butter. I don't use much coconut butter, and I love that question about the extra virgin olive oil in the freezer, because the pie dough in essential vegan desserts is made with oil, not with vegan butter. And I chose that because I think you learn a lot more than you would by just replacing dairy butter with vegan butter. So when you're making pie dough, everything has to be cold, especially the fat. And in my refrigerator, the 2 oils that I use to make vegan baked goods are extra virgin olive oil. I use a mild tasting one when I don't want the flavor of the olive oil. I use a spicier, greener one in an olive oil cake, for example. And I use sunflower oil, which I think tastes almost buttery. So I have containers of both in the refrigerator that's behind me. The extra virgin olive oil gets solid. The sunflower oil stays liquid. It just gets cold. But when I first noticed that, and that was quite some time ago, I thought, oh, well, I'll just use the solidified extra virgin olive oil to cut it in the way I would with a solid fat. And it doesn't work. It starts melting. So yeah, you can do that. I have actually, it's unusual to hear somebody want to use extra virgin olive oil in place of peanut butters and coconut butter. I think the solidified olive oil is going to melt and not do what the coconut butter does. But if you're going to set it, then set it later, it might. So let's see. Oh, this is exciting. Deborah is a volunteer recipe tester for America's Test Kitchen. Do I know of places where she can get experience doing plant-based recipe testing? I think America's Test Kitchen probably has some plant-based recipes. I'm seeing more anywhere. Carol, send an email to me, or anybody. There are always people looking for recipe testers, cookbook developers, cooking school teachers are always looking for recipe developers. And so I don't think you'll have a problem. Find some online groups, plant-based vegan groups, and introduce yourself and let them know, or send me your information and I'll see what I can find out. Kathy C. wants to know, well, of course, how to choose what egg substitute to use when trying to veganize a recipe that calls for eggs. Kathy, that is a big question, and you're right when you ask how to choose, because there is no one size fits all. I see charts all the time. And you have to think about what is the function of the egg you're replacing. The liquid's easy, binding is easy, flavor, we can do something about flavor. Leavening, we're going to use some extra baking powder, baking soda maybe, and vinegar. But we have an entire unit in Essential Vegan Desserts course on replacing eggs, because that's the thing that people tend to be, when people look at vegan desserts, they say, how do you do that? And actually, it's not so hard. It just isn't really difficult. And that leads me to this, if I may. If there's anybody here from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York City, Delaware. Or I have friends who might be interested in coming to an event. I don't do too many live events anymore, but I'm a member, as is Chef Shar and Chef Dimitra of Rouxbe, a member of Les Dames d'Escoffier Philadelphia chapter, and I'm doing a modern vegan desserts demo and presentation at Drexel University Department of Food and Health on May 21st. So if anyone's interested, there's going to be a vegan appetizer table and then a vegan dessert extravaganza buffet and my demo and presentation in between. And I'm definitely talking about swapping things out. So Catherine is having trouble getting a crisp peanut butter cookie. She's tried about 10 and cannot get a crisp cookie. Well, first of all, congratulations to you for trying. I think my peanut butter cookie's pretty crisp. You know, there are people who like soft cookies and people who like crispy cookies, and I like crispier cookies. Try lowering the amount of fat in your cookie. Peanut butter has a lot of fat in it, so you shouldn't need a lot. And try baking them, obviously, a bit longer, but without looking at your recipe, I can't really help you. I have a peanut butter cookie. I'm trying to think if it's on my website. It might be. It's definitely in my book, More Great Good Dairy-Free Desserts Naturally. And it's pretty crispy if you bake it longer. I give people two choices. You like it chewier, bake it this much. You like it crispier, bake it this much. But it has a lot less added fat than most peanut butter cookies. You know, the more fat in a cookie, the more it spreads and could potentially be crisper. So that's a little backwards. Well, it looks like I have reached the end of the questions, and they were great questions. Thank you all so much for coming and spending this hour with me, and I hope to see you next month in June. Take care, everyone. Be well, be happy, stay safe, eat well.